And welcome to Conversations. I'm Jason Plotkin, Program Director of Congregation Emanu, and every Wednesday we sit down with a member of the congregation, the community, or perhaps even from the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. During my tenure at Emanu, it has come up that the voices and musicians involved in some of our programs and worship are not, heard but not seen. So a few years ago, congregant Stephen Finberg and I hosted a program called The Hidden Treasures of Emanu, exposing many of the members of the professional octet who reside up above the dark. So this week, we're happy to take a step forward with those and highlighting someone involved in our worship that you may have heard but not seen, and that is Brinton Smith, the principal cellist of the Houston Symphony since 2005, a faculty member of the Shepherd School of Music across the street at Rice University, and the Aspen Music Festival. In Emanu circles, where have you heard him? You've heard him as the cellist who performs Kol Nidre in the Barish Sanctuary. So Brinton, welcome to our show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So Brinton, let's start with you as the person. So many of in our audience have likely seen your name as we promote the fact that you are the cellist that performs at Kol Nidre and maybe in some other publicity. Give us a short glimpse of who you are and your background and what we should know about you.
Well, I was born, my family's from Philadelphia. I was born outside of Detroit, and we moved to Phoenix when I was about 8 years old because my mother had it with the weather, and she told my father she's going someplace warm, and if he wants to come along, it's time to start looking for a job. My father's a mathematician, my mother's a pianist, and both music lovers. So I grew up with music around the house, but I don't think my parents ever thought I was going to become a musician. I was kind of spectacularly uncoordinated as an 8 or 9 year old. The kind of kid who threw them a ball, it would hit them 3 times before they dropped it. So I was always supposed to be the scientist when I was younger, but actually when just after we moved to Arizona, there was a in-school demo, and someone came and played the cello, which I'd kind of grown up with the cello around the house, because we have a very close personal friend who's a wonderful cellist from Detroit. And it struck me. I came home and I said, I want to play the cello. And my parents said, well, okay, as long as you keep up your other studies and do other things. My educational background was a little bit weird because my father was working with me in mathematics and I was pretty advanced, and there weren't a lot of options at that time in Phoenix, so I ended up going to university instead of high school. I did half of a semester of high school, and then I dropped out and went full-time in the university. I started taking my first university courses when I was 10, just in mathematics and German, and then I had enough credits to already be a sophomore by the time I was ready to drop out of high school. So But I majored in mathematics because my parents wanted me to get a degree in something employable. They wanted me to have something to fall back on because it's very hard in music. I mean, the number of people who make a career, even going to top conservatories, the number of people who make a career in music is about similar to the number of Division I college basketball players that actually make the NBA. The odds are about the same. I think you make more money in the NBA, but you're talking about 1%, 2%, 3%. So my parents really wanted me to have something. So I got my bachelor's degree in mathematics, and then I went to USC, and I went there because of the cello teacher, and I'd already been flying from Phoenix to study with her, because at that time they would pay you to be a math graduate student, or you could pay them to be a music student. So I was a math graduate student and did work for a master's degree in math before there came kind of a crisis point in my life at 19, maybe just 20, where I had to make a decision, and I kind of ran away to join the circus and went to Juilliard. And from there, I've been a pretty traditional kind of musician background. I stayed at Juilliard for 5 years. I did a master's and a doctorate there. And then my first job out of school was as principal cello in the San Diego Symphony. They went bankrupt in my second year. I spent 5 years as the principal cellist of the Fort Worth Symphony, which was the first time I'd ever lived in Texas. my first experience to Texas. Then I moved and took a job as a section of the New York Philharmonic in the cello section there. Spent 3 years there and was pretty clear that I was interested in looking for a principal position in warm weather. And so when Houston came open, it seemed like the right fit, and I was fortunate to win the audition. I've been here since 2005.
And, as someone who has studied, taught, and performed music, I think the question is always, who are some of the people that may have inspired your own musical journey?
Well, as we were talking about, there was Italo Babini, who was the principal cellist of the Detroit Symphony, is a fantastic, beautiful musician, kind of a real eccentric. He was kind of my childhood hero when I was 4 or 5. I'd actually like fall asleep outside the door, like listening to them rehearse. And then the other person who really changed my life was a teacher I met. I told you I came to kind of a crisis point where I had to decide between music and math. When I was 19, I went to the Aspen Music Festival for summer, and I actually thought it was going to be the last thing I did in classical music. I was at a point when I was really just, it seemed like having a career in classical music was just very self-involved in a way, almost, it's almost, I don't know how to put it, like almost dishonest in a way. I didn't like the business, and I mean, I like personally the musicians, but I didn't like the way it forced you to be. And I met Zara Nelsova that summer, who was a Canadian cellist, probably the first female cellist who had a really significant career, really had a great solo career, studied with Casals and Katagorsky and Feuermann, all the great cellists. I met her that summer in Aspen, and she changed my conception of what it meant to be a musician. I mean, she was always about something greater than herself. There was always, in a way, she used to talk about it, about protecting your belief in music the way a mother protects her unborn child. And this was the first person that I want to be this kind of person. This is who I want to be. And so Zara, she said, you should come to Juilliard, you should be a musician, do this now. And I didn't know what to do in that summer. And she gave me some of the best advice I've ever had. She said, first of all, when you make a decision, if you don't know what the decision is, wait. Wait until you know. But when you make the decision, make a choice. Don't exercise options. Really make a choice. And so I didn't know that summer. I went back to USC, and the first day of USC, I knew. I knew immediately what my choice was going to be, and the timing was more awkward than maybe if I'd made a decision in a different time, but I knew from that moment that I was owning the choice, and so I've never regretted it. But she has been really my model for who I want to be as a musician and a person.
It's really interesting what you were saying about the choice. I mean, that resonates across the board with just about anything major in life that we are going through, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, the thing about Zara is that she was not just a great musician. She was a great human being. Her advice about life was as important as her advice about music, and it's so much the same. I mean, how you choose to live your life expresses in everything we do. This is one of the things we always talk about at Temple, right?
That's right. That's right. And, let's switch to the pandemic. And obviously some of the choices going on during the pandemic are not stuff we can make. A few months ago, you were quoted in the Houston Chronicle saying that you felt completely at sea because in-person performances, which, is a big part of the music scene, were kind of came to a complete halt. I mean, that was early May. It's now August. Do you still feel completely at sea? What's the feeling as a musician that wants to be performing for people and in person?
It was so bizarre, such a strange experience, and we actually stopped in the middle of a week. Like we had like 2 and 3 rehearsals on something, and then suddenly they said, you know what, take your instruments. This is maybe in March. take your instruments because we're probably not coming back right away. And we thought, is it going to be a week? Is it going to be 2 weeks? So, we all thought like, okay, well, maybe this will be a month, but, we'll be back at it sooner or later. And I don't think anybody quite conceived that it was going to go the way that it went. But since I was 25, since I started in San Diego, my entire life has been kind of the rhythm of every week. You're preparing, almost every week, you're preparing a concert. You work through the week to get to this moment where you share it with people, where you share this music. I use the analogy of if you were a chef and you're cooking all this food, if you don't feed it, if nobody eats it, then you have kind of an existential crisis. And I mean, at first it was nice. It was kind of a relief, like, okay, I maybe I'll get all these things done that I keep saying I don't have time for. And then, I realized, actually time wasn't really the problem. It was motivation. So it was, there's an interesting kind of philosophical pause in life because, you feel like you're always on the rat race, on the wheel. But at the same time, I realized how much I missed that moment. You take it for granted when you have it every week to get up on stage. I know for people who come in the audience, it's not an every week thing. They don't, but for us, we're so used to it. You kind of take it for granted, and to miss that connection, I didn't realize how much it meant to me. And of course, to have something to always be preparing for, to always have a goal every week, kind of always set out for us in a way. And it was very difficult. I also had a major accident with my cello like 3 days before we shut down everything in March, and my cello ended up having to go to New York. My wife flew it to New York, got it there just before New York closed down, and luckily the luthier had it at his house in New Jersey and was able to work through the whole shutdown there. And I picked it up again in June, but it was a major repair. For the first time I'd been without my cello in 14 years. So that, missing my cello, missing work, missing the goal, everything just felt completely out. But what the symphony has done, the symphony is now performing again. Every Saturday, we're doing these live streaming concerts, and we will continue to do that until there's a time we can get audience in. And even, I think, until we're back to full audiences, I think we're always going to have a streaming component for those who can't come in. So we're actually kind of restarting the rhythm. These last month or so, we're one of the first orchestras in the country to do this, but we spent a lot of time working out how to do it safely. So I kind of have that rhythm now. And actually, we have a big concert this Saturday, so just came from rehearsal for that. And having this kind of goal, and even though it's different without the live audience there, but just the fact of live performance, not something where, okay, I'm going to do 27 takes and I'm going to find the best one and I'll put it out there and be perfectionist. No, to actually live in that moment and say, you know what, this is it. Because you make different choices when you're playing live, when there's no net.
We're going to talk a little more about the online component because it's very fascinating. And as someone who does marketing and social media, I'm very fascinated in the online component. But one of the things that I think about, and maybe it's my vantage point because I'm thinking about Cantor, Rollins, Simmons at Emanu, the vocal musicians, because that's my focus. I think, there's a lot said about the role that musicians can do in light of COVID. What are they saying in the music industry as it relates to the instrumental musicians? What are the limitations or restrictions that you're hearing and seeing as it relates to the role that a musician like yourself is playing?
Well, it really varies a lot by instrument, of course, as you can imagine. And one of the unknown components, it's just being studied now, there's 3 or 4 studies, is the aerosolization. Because we talked, in the beginning, we were always talking about droplets, and that's where the 6 feet came. And now they're talking about possible aerosol spread too. So we're trying to make sure that we're safe. In that, I have to say the symphony did kind of a magnificent job of getting on top of all the leading research, of working with Methodist Hospital closely with a couple of doctors there, and we're also in a participation study with Rice University to study instrumental effects. Now, for string players, it's basically just breathing, so we basically just have to wear masks. It's not really any different than then you're more danger talking than we are playing. When we're playing, when our mouths are shut, then it's just the exhalation. So masks and distancing work quite well. Most of the wind instruments produce less air motion than you would expect. Flute is kind of an exception. Flute produces a lot. Trumpet produces probably the most of the brass. But percussion, harp, then it's just like strings. It's just a question of how much you're breathing. None of them quite as much as voice. And I know it's tough for voice. My daughter's a singer, and we're dealing with all of that. But it's actually, this is the one time when having all that space at Jones Hall, which is usually almost too big for a classical music venue, it's kind of nice right now that we have, and I have to say they put in great HEPA filtration. They have, we're very careful about you only touch your stuff, and everything is sterilized after every day. They have like a 30-page protocol that they worked out in extreme detail to make sure that we're safe. And of course, we're being tested every week too, which means every person appearing on stage has had a test. Now it's going to be that week. They've had a test 2 days before, including our guest conductor.
Wow. It's just, the whole thing is fascinating as it relates to testing and protocols and procedures. Those of us who have been to restaurants, I haven't, but those who've been to restaurants or to places of worship, it's all very different now. And I think different is the scheme of the game. You kind of alluded to this earlier, that you're doing performances in Jones Hall. Other organizations are obviously taking advantage of online presences if they weren't already. Some were a little better positioned than others, but what have you as a performer, what have your colleagues enjoyed about creating this online presence, connecting with the people who would have typically been in the seats at Jones Hall? How does that feel as a performer? What kind of feedback are you getting from those that are in the audience, if you will? What is that? You brought up earlier, long-term, you can see this streaming being a thing.
I think, first of all, you develop sometimes some pretty close personal friendships with some of the audience members. It feels like family. They see you every week. They're staring at you for 2 hours. We see them too, though. You have this. There are people I know now quite closely through the years, through their work on the board, through the fact, we'll look out in the audience and say, oh, here's so-and-so's here today. And so we miss that too. But, we faced a choice, and every orchestra has made this choice differently. There are some orchestras that just shut down for the year. They just threw up their hands and said, this is impossible. This is too difficult to manage. We can't figure this out. For all the work and all the effort that goes into streaming something like this, it's not particularly profitable. It's just a fraction of we're not really doing it for financial gain. A best case scenario kind of covers the costs of doing this. And I asked our executive director, John Mangum, I asked him, is it worth doing this if we don't make any money for it? And he said something that really connected with me. He said, we tell our community that we believe what we do is vital. We believe that having the arts in our life, that having this musical connection, having live music is vital to life, to making a community, and our actions have to reflect that. And if we can do something, if we can give something to our community, to the people who are in the houses, we need to do that. Not just to think about not a question of dollars and cents, but a question of message, a question of morals. And I have to tell you, it feels incredible to go back and to be performing and to kind of finding those skills again, and to know. And one of the nice features of the concerts, actually, that we don't have in a real concert, because we do it through YouTube Live, so there's actually this live chat, and you can read, you can't do it on stage, obviously, but you come off afterwards and you can read through all the comments that people are making during the time. So there's a nice component to this, and I think, as the world comes out of this, it's going to be changed to some extent. I mean, I think there's going to be a dual component. I could easily imagine, for instance, after our concerts are broadcast, you have access to them for 24 hours. I could easily imagine people who are in the live audience going home and having the chance to watch it again on YouTube if they want for the next 24 hours after their ticket. Something like this, we're going to have to slightly reinvent what music means, but I think what's not going to change is how important the difference between live and video, because there's a lot of creative videos, but after 4 months, I'm so tired of watching videos. You know, I want to see something that exists in that moment and only in that moment.
So you kind of led to the next question. Looking ahead, for those who may not be familiar with where the Houston Symphony stands, what's the public facing plan for the Houston Symphony? Have they said we're going to plan to resume in 2021 as it relates to in person? Where does the Houston Symphony fall in all this?
Well, actually, the first thing we did, I mean, we're kind of, you know, in March, everybody was kind of at sea, and we're trying to figure out how long is this going to last? What is this going to be? Once we kind of saw what was going on, we started to make plans. They started to make plans in April already for this idea of living room concerts, where they took musicians, and for instance, my wife's a pianist, my daughter's a singer, so for our weekend, they came to our house and we did a recital program and live streamed it from our living room. And we did this with, I think, 8, 9, 10 different musicians who have musical families, and that people loved that, actually. That's kind of a very personal connection that you don't usually get. So that was, we were the first orchestra in the country to do anything like that. And then we went, you know, the plan from, I think, July 4th was our first actual concert where we did a kind of collaborative concert with the city, that thing that was broadcast on TV. From then, we've been doing concerts every weekend, and our plan is so long as, you know, unless there's some indication that we can't do it safely, if something changes, our plan is to keep presenting music every weekend. Our opening night, obviously, everything will be streamed. When we can find a way to safely have audience, we will do that. Obviously, we have to respond to the situation on the ground in Houston, and they have a very complicated protocol for audience too. But already in Jones Hall, they've removed several rows of seats. You know, they're kind of making the plans for what audience distancing will look like. And we have some experience with this already in Europe, because European orchestras are back playing with a certain kind of distancing. So we'll have, I think by the time we're ready to do that, we'll have a lot of information, a lot of plans for how to do that. But our plan is, we're going to have to stay, because of the 6-foot distancing, so long as we have to have 6 feet between every musician. There's a limit to how many people we can get on the stage, even at Jones. Probably 35 to 40 people. So that means you're not going to see anything larger than a Mozart or Schubert symphony, something early Beethoven, something like that. There's not going to be Mahler. So Mahler 8 is not happening. You know, the Symphony of 1,000. We can't, things with chorus, unfortunately, probably can't happen until, you know, hopefully. So our plan is we're reacting to the situation and trying to modify our programs, keeping the same spirit of the original program. And as soon as, you know, if there's people start getting vaccinated, if they find a new treatment breakthrough, something like that, as soon as we can get back to sitting closer and getting more people on stage and getting more people in the audience, obviously we'll go to that too.
Well, let's transition to your teaching. So Rice University, always an innovator. Some of the stuff that they're always doing something innovative, and we saw a few weeks ago they publicized that they were putting tents, air-conditioned tents, to help with social distancing in the classroom, not having as many, I guess, students in the halls and things like that. The Rice Shepherd School, obviously very world-renowned, new building coming online.
Yeah.
What do you see as a faculty member, your experience, what it will be like one-on-one or with multiple students, if you will, come this fall?
So one of the hard things about being a musician and this transition to online is that the online platforms, which are actually pretty incredibly impressive for voice conferencing are awful for music. And I've been kind of done a deep dive into the technology, and it works a little bit better for singing, but it basically, the way the compression works, it doesn't recognize a cello. It doesn't know what to do with that. I mean, a cello that sounds like your deepest bass to your highest soprano, it sounds a little bit like an electric cello played next door under a swimming pool. I mean, you're listening and you're trying to, like, I think, so maybe. So that was an incredibly frustrating experience. We found some workarounds that have improved things, but it's still, I mean, I'd say online teaching for a musical instrument where you have to kind of model things back and forth. You have to play in real time and watch how they do things and have that sound world. You have to have each other's sound world in your ears. That has been bad. So I'm very happy that we're going to have, of course, 6-foot distancing. Everyone's going to wear masks. Nobody's going to the Shepherd School who's not a student or a faculty member or staff. But we will have live lessons, and I've done even some of that in my home where we sit 20 feet apart from each other and wear masks. But teaching live makes all the difference for music. Performances there, of course, are probably going to have to be only streamed. The opening of the incredible new opera hall is going to have to be, punted forward into the spring, hopefully. So a lot of the things, and of course, orchestra we can't do there, which is the tough thing, because it's a fantastic orchestral school. If you've heard the Shepherd Orchestra, they play on the level of a professional orchestra. In fact, a lot of their students get jobs in the Houston Symphony and in other professional orchestras. That's one of the things they do incredibly well is place their graduates in orchestras. So mostly we're going to be back live for all the smaller things, chamber music with distancing and masks, lessons with distancing and masks. The larger classes, of course, will have to be hybrid or all online. But that really doesn't involve my part of what I do.
Right. As someone who isn't too distant removed from college, I guess 15 years, I just can't imagine like the college experience. I mean, obviously we're hearing about athletics, but dorm move-in and simple things like that just seem so bizarre what the schools are doing. And I admire the faculty, whether it's the college faculty or any faculty who's doing online or one-on-one teaching of any sort. One more question before we move into Kol Nidre and your relation with Emmanuel. And you kind of alluded to this with the streaming component, but I always like to ask our guest if there's one thing that's going to, quote unquote, stick as we emerge in whatever the new normal is post-COVID. What is it that you think beyond the streaming that we're going to see in that new normal, whatever it may be?
I think streaming components will become, I think that will become a regular part of it. I think orchestras had dipped their toe into it, but they're conservative institutions by nature. They're not able to change quickly because they're dealing with union contracts and they're dealing with all kinds of things. I think this has forced people to innovate, and that part of it will become something. But honestly, the part that I'm really going to remember from this is how much it means to me to be in the same room with the audience, to actually have this experience where you all share the same air, where you share the same moment together. It's easy to take for granted when it becomes kind of routine. It's every Friday, every Saturday, every Sunday. You dress up in tails and go do this, and you walk through after a concert. You're walking around in tails in the grocery store, and people are looking at you. But you think this is normal. You think this is, and it's not normal. It's special. It's very special, and I think it's so easy to take for granted what we have in our life and the opportunities that we have. And I hope that I will never forget again what a privilege it is to play any single concert.
So let's take a turn towards Kol Nidre. and your relationship with Emmanuel. So for those not familiar, Kol Nidre is the evening of the Yom Kippur commemoration once a year. How did you become connected with our congregation and the role of playing the Kol Nidre song?
Yeah, I grew up, I would call like maybe what you'd call like a Gino, a Jewish in name only, but actually my name's Smith, so not even. But it was not really a significant part of my life, but as I got older, it was something I began to seek out. And the Kol Nidre service has always been kind of the one thing I've always gone to. And sometimes I would, in most of the cities I've lived in, eventually I would end up associated with a temple and start playing there. But even when I wasn't, I still always wanted to go to the service. In fact, our wedding was done by a rabbi from Emmanuel in New York, but my wife's Chinese, so we had a rabbi marry us in a Chinese restaurant, which kind of works. So actually, when I moved to Houston, I became friends with Gloria and Joe Prezant, who have been and are very close friends, and I was looking for a place to go to service, so they invited me just to come as a guest to the service. So I came for a year or two just as a guest, and I loved Rabbi Walter. I mean, how can you not? And it felt like such a great fit. And then I think probably because of Gloria and Joe's suggestion and maybe repeated suggestion, they had me in to play for the Kol Nidre, and then we were alternating for a while because they had other people that they traditionally used, so we had kind of a tag team going, but I would always go whether I was playing or not. I always go to the service. And now I guess I've done the last 5 or 6, 7, 8 years. I've done pretty much every year, and it's a very I'm in front of people all the time. And people always say like, "Oh, I wish you would come down and sit in the front so we could see you." But I actually love the fact that it's not about me. I love the fact that I'm up there with Ann and the choir and the loft, and that it's just about the service and about the music and about what that means, and that there's no nothing, no ego. That it's just trying to be a part of a very special night.
Now, as someone who appreciates the logistics and the work that the various musicians and the clergy put into High Holy Days, is there something that you do, knowing that this is the one time a year that you do this at Emmanuel, that you do in the lead up? Let's pull back the curtain. What do you do, like with Ann Frobeater in the week or few before? What are the steps to prepare for this evening?
I mean, we have it pretty much down to a routine at this point with Ann. I mean, we'll come in and rehearse a day or two before, but it's fairly easy to put together. Actually, because my schedule is so packed, teaching with Rice and with the symphony services, and often, it'll fall on a weekday. It'll fall kind of on a very busy day. The hardest thing for me is to find a time to eat and drink enough before the service, and especially when we had the 2 services and there was the early service, so I have to be there playing by 6. And I've done for most of my life I've done the fast, and I'm trying to stuff myself and hydrate and do everything to prepare for that, and then play. And so it's hard not to go into kind of a food coma. Maybe this is too behind the scenes. Maybe you don't want to know this, but actually the hard thing is you're trying to get enough nourishment to make it through the next 24 hours, and then still think of a performance, because normally you don't usually want to perform after a big meal. Usually it goes the opposite way. But we know the timing, and we have a kind of good sense of the whole rhythm of this, usually I'll go out and sit in the, between, if I play the introduction, if we play the Bloch prayer to introduce it, then I'll kind of go sit in the service, and I know about when to go on.
So, you mentioned being up in the loft, but what kind of feeling, and you brought up this feeling you get playing in person, what kind of feeling do you get when you have 2,000 people in the room, can't see you, but Kol Nidre is such a memorable moment. Emanu has had plenty of talented people, yourself included, who have been a part of that moment. But what does it feel like for you during that moment, after that moment? What is the feel?
I think there's a connection. In the best moments, it feels a little bit different than a normal performance. Actually, I mean, because it's about something different. I feel. I mean, I think at that moment, I feel the most connected to the history and the culture and the ancestry that came before. It is. I mean, it is a. Much of what we do. I mean, look, what's special about a Beethoven symphony? It can inspire people from anywhere in the world. It connects you with the same emotions that people felt 200 years ago. But I mean, with Kol Nidre, how far back are we going? How much has this meant to how many people? I mean, how much life, how much suffering, how much history is wrapped up in that chant? How many people that came before us that have heard this, that have known this? And so it is. I mean, not to be corny, but it's often a little bit transcendental for me in that moment, because it means more than just notes to me.
And then a congregant, actually, Stephen Fenberg, I referenced earlier, submitted this question. He was curious about your experiences with other Jewish liturgical music that you've either played or taught, what some of your favorite stuff out there was.
I mean, it's funny. There's so many Jewish composers, particularly in the 20th century, but most of them were not writing Jewish music. Really, there's a few. Joseph Akron was one of the first who actually said, no, I'm going to write Jewish music. I'm going to write, and if you might know, his Hebrew Melody for violin is one of the, he was one of the first that was kind of overtly trying to write not really music from tradition, not like Bruch did. And of course, I don't know if most people know or not, but Bruch was not Jewish. He was a Protestant, but he just loved the Kol Nidre melody. One of his Jewish friends took him to a temple, and he was so taken with it, he wanted to set it, and of course became one of our most famous composers. But Bloch, Ernst Bloch was another one. He wrote a piece called Solomon, for cello and orchestra, which is kind of one of the cello concertos. And actually, my teacher, Zara Nelsova, was very close with Bloch. He wrote for her 3 solo suites. They recorded the piece Bloch Prayer, which I often play right before the service begins. We usually do it. That he wrote and recorded with my teacher, Nelsova. And she played Shlomo a lot. I studied all these things with her. So that is really my connection. Again, none of it is actual liturgical music. There's the one piece that I've really wanted to say. I love the melody of Avinu Malkeinu, and I think that would make a fabulous setting for cello. That's on one of my projects. My daughter's off to college this fall too, so we'll see if I get more time that way or not. But that is something I've wanted to do for a long time.
All right, and we're turning towards the end of our conversation and our time together. I always like to end on a positive note. Is there a story or something that's happened during the last 5-6 months of COVID that really resonates with you, that really stood out, if you will?
I mean, I think it's hard kind of to have perspective as we're going through it. But I think, and not knowing when it's going to end kind of makes it feel like this kind of endless torture, but I think we're going to look back and in a way be grateful for this time. I mean, the life is such a rat race, and it's so busy all the time. And honestly, I mean, for me, this was in a way a blessing. My daughter was a senior in high school, and of course, that's a very tough time to lose those last 3 months. I feel terrible for her. But for me, to have this time, this kind of family time, and this time to be together and not crazy busy was something very special. And I hope when life resumes and everybody is busy again and running, that we'll remember some of the philosophical lessons about what life really is that we feel, and so that it helps us to prioritize what's really important in what we do in our day and our life. It's been a fascinating time to live through, and I know it's frustrating at the time, but I think we will appreciate it more in perspective when life is resumed.
And lastly, you were talking about a performance this Saturday. For those who are watching on Facebook or YouTube, we'll make sure to include this information. But if you could go just plug it for us and tell us a little bit about it.
So this Saturday, actually, because we had a conductor who canceled because he ended up feeling unsafe about air transportation to get here, and so we had to rejigger the program. And so what we ended up, one of the things we're doing is we have a horn quartet, we have an oboe quartet, we have a beautiful piece by George Walker, one of the first great African American composers. But we also have, I have a former student, a Korean named Charles So, who grew up in Houston, and he was my student. And then he went off to the Colburn Conservatory and is really a spectacular cellist. And so we've been rehearsing some duos for fun, and they said, well, why don't you come play them on this program? So we are going to play on the program about 15 minutes of duos, some kind of spectacularly hard, oh God help us, virtuoso stuff, some things that we've transcribed from violin that have never been heard on cellos before. But it's really a beautiful program, and it's kind of a joy to have someone that was my student once and is now a colleague, and kind of, watching them grow up and kind of become a full-fledged musician and an equal is one of the joys of what I get to do.
Right, and as we say in Judaism, l'dor vador, generation to generation.
Exactly.
So, Brinton, thank you so much again for coming on, sharing a bit about your experience, what you're going through as a member of the symphony, your role as a faculty member, and your ties to Emanu. I think people enjoy learning a little more about you, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's great to talk to you.
And for those who have been watching, I'd like to thank David Tanner for what he does behind the scenes. David is always playing a role recording these, and if we have tech issues, working on those deals. But this Sunday, August 16th, we are recording a special episode with Lena Hidalgo, Judge Lena Hidalgo, Harris County Judge. If you have any questions, put those in this chat, email me, let me know. Happy to ask her. So we will not have our regular Wednesday broadcast next week due to the Sisterhood donor with Barbara Pierce Bush, but we will follow up and resume Wednesday, August 26th. We will have Judge Bob Schaefer, one of our congregants, as we look at the court system and how they're dealing with the pandemic and what we as citizens can expect as jurors going forward. Fascinating stuff. I'm sure you'll want to listen again Wednesdays at noon. Conversations. Jason Plotkin, Program Director here at Emanu. You can watch us on our website in the Polar Chapel streaming or on our Facebook page. We look forward to having you in the future. Stay tuned for exciting topics to come. Take care, everybody.